Hello and welcome to another edition of RADTV UK. Today we've got Syria, of course, a week before the vital vote in Congress. What's the outlook? What are the facts? We've got another anniversary coming up, of course, the 9/11 anniversary, 11th of September. Another possible false flag. Some people are saying Syria was a false flag. A lot of people are saying 9/11 was a false flag. And then we've got news shorts. But to start off with, let's think about Syria. I've got Roy Hunter here in the studio. Thanks, Roy, for coming round. But first of all, I'll just run through some of the information that you may not have seen if you rely on the mainstream media in the NATO countries for your information. Now, we've got William Bowles, who's a very logical analyst on informationclearinghouse.org. He's analysed where the evidence, of course it's all about evidence, or it should all be about evidence. What is the evidence that President Assad's been attacking his own people with chemical weapons? So William Bowles has analysed where the evidence has come from, and surprise, surprise, it's come from our old friend Israel, who of course are enemies of the Syrian regime and have every interest in seeing them weakened, seeing their military weakened. The evidence seems to be a tapped phone call, which the Israelis say they recorded. We don't know what the phone call said. We don't know if it was by an Israeli agent in the Syrian government. Undoubtedly there will be some. The Israelis boast of that. We don't know if he was admitting that they had done the attack or if he was just inquiring about an attack. We don't know if the whole thing is faked. So that's that bit of evidence. Then we have the evidence of the gas attack itself, of the chemical attack itself. The experts are saying, and these are experts, for instance, at Stratfor, which is very close to the Pentagon, it's very close to Washington. This is not a dissident organisation. Stratfor are saying that they don't know who carried out this attack, whether it was the rebels, who of course the Americans are supporting, or whether it was the Assad government, who they wish to apparently destroy. That's Stratfor. We've got other reports from chemical weapons experts who are saying this does not look like a weaponised sarin attack. Weaponised sarin, which is what Damascus may possess, is a hugely dangerous and poisonous chemical. There would be many more than a few hundred deaths if that was used. Anybody handling the dead bodies would be liable to die themselves, and there's no sign of anybody wearing protective clothing who's handling the dead bodies. We've got Natural News website who is saying that the signature which American Secretary of State John Kerry claims they found on Damascus residents, the signature of chemical attacks, would simply be fluoride, which of course we have in our toothpaste, we have in the water supply. In large quantities it's highly poisonous, and that is the signature that they will have been looking for. They will not have had any more specific evidence of chemical attacks than that. And notice they did use the word signature, which could mean anything. There are many signatures, that you can have many signatures, and you can have a signature which might be of something else. So effectively, if Natural News are correct, John Kerry is doing everything but lying us into war. And then finally, we have a report on the ground from an Associated Press reporter, although it hasn't been endorsed by Associated Press, which is owned by the American mainstream media. But this reporter has been on the spot, and she says that everybody in this area who was allegedly attacked by the Syrian government, is quite clear that it was the rebels who had their own homemade chemical weapons. That's why there weren't so many deaths from it, and they've been supplied by the Saudis, and the rebels themselves are saying that the Saudis should have given them better instructions on how to use it. So there we are. That's an alternative, if you like, look at the evidence, but somebody needs to balance. We try to be balanced here, but somebody needs to balance the appalling bias of the NATO media, the BBC, the Washington Post, the American news networks, who seem to be quite uncritically accepting the word of politicians and intelligence services when everybody knows that they lied us into the Iraq War only a few years ago. So now, Roy, what is the political state of play as we go on air tonight?
Well, of course, the biggest news here is the British government, the British Parliament voting no to go to war in Syria. We've always been the US's staunchest ally, really. In lots of ways, I feel the Americans couldn't have gone into Iraq without the British support.
They needed Tony Blair.
Yeah, they needed Tony Blair to go in, really. But this time round, they've got no support whatsoever. They haven't got congressional support yet. Looking 50-50 whether they'll get congressional support, but Obama's saying he'll go in whether he gets congressional support anyway.
Is he definitely saying that?
Yeah, he's definitely saying. They're saying that the congressional vote is not binding. And if we look at the congressional vote on Libya, it was 295 to 123 against. So Congress voted not to go into Libya, and yet Obama simply ignored them and went in anyway.
So this is why some people are talking about impeachment. They're saying that one offence, is one thing, but to flagrantly violate the US Constitution twice in a couple of years, when he's called for a vote, would be impeachable, and he could be impeached.
Sure, but I mean, he wasn't impeached last time, was he? No. It's easy to say he's going to be impeached, but they didn't do it last time. I don't suppose
they tried
they
to
will
impeach Clinton, didn't they? It went quite a long way, that impeachment move against President Clinton, for a sexual peccadillo.
Yeah, but that's a different thing, isn't it? That's far more serious, isn't it? In America,
America,
that's far more serious than killing a few coloured people,
foreigners with brown skins.
Yeah. But I mean, this time they've got no support at all. The Arab League saying no, they're not going to get involved. Egypt, Iraq, Lebanon, Tunisia and Algeria have all said no to that. So no support from the Arab League. NATO have said no, they're not going to get involved. The UN has said no. The British Parliament said no. Even the French now are talking about sending it for a parliamentary vote. So there's nothing there at all, really. Very little support. There's leaks coming out of the Pentagon now. Various sources inside the Pentagon are leaking out policy issues surrounding Syria, warship manoeuvres. A lot of the information, the alternative media is coming through Pentagon leaks. So, the whole administration really is very much against this. We've got Justin Amash, who's a senator. Sorry, no, he's not. He's a Republican congressman. And he's saying everybody he speaks to in the military is asking him to vote no on Syria.
One problem, it seems to me, for Obama is that there's no strategy. They don't seem to have a sort of plan. They're just simply going to let off a loads of bombs against Syria, destroy the Syrian army, presumably, like they did in Libya. And then where will we be? Well, Israel will be very happy because they've had an Arab army destroyed. Yeah. But apart from that, what's in it for anybody else?
Well, there's two strategies here that I see, and the reason it looks like there's no strategy is because these aren't stupid people. Let's not underestimate them. They do have strategies, but those strategies aren't something they can present to the American people. It's not something for public consumption. The first strategy, which has been the strategy throughout this so-called civil war, but it's not a civil war, it's a proxy war against Iran. But the first strategy, and this strategy has been going on all the way through, is they don't want a victor. They don't want Al-Qaeda to win. Nobody wants Al-Qaeda to win, which is basically what the rebels are comprised of. The Al-Nusra Front is basically an Al-Qaeda front. They've always wanted Al-Qaeda and the Assad regime fighting each other, killing each other off, destabilising the country. They don't want Al-Qaeda to win, they don't want Assad to win. Yeah. And basically, after that country's been fighting each other for 4 or 5 years, it will just be destroyed, and then they can balkanise it, they can chop it up into different regions. So that's the first strategy.
We should say here that this isn't just speculation. They do say this on Israeli TV. They say, well, we just want them fighting each other.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's this isn't just speculation.
No, not at all.
Theory.
No. Yeah. And the 8-year Iran-Iraq war was basically that. Really, was keeping them fighting.
Each other.
So that they weren't going to.
And we were supplying arms to both sides.
Yeah,
indeed
we were,
war.
including chemical weapons.
To
Saddam Hussein. Yes. And the second, as I say, the second strategy here is that they are undermining Iran. Iran. Iran is the next goal, and Syria is a very staunch ally of Iran. And by knocking down Assad, then that undermines Iran's power in the region quite a bit.
And as we discussed in a previous clip, which you may have seen, there's an issue about oil pipelines. Qatar would very much like to take its natural gas up through Syria to the Mediterranean, which is why Qatar was so interested in this, or one reason. And on the other hand, Iran, Iraq and Syria would very much like to run a pipeline to the Mediterranean themselves. So it's a sort of war of two pipelines in some ways, I guess.
Yes, yes, indeed. But we've also got Ron Paul and Pat Buchanan coming out and saying that this is a false flag, that nobody knows who. It seems there was sarin gas or some kind of chemical weapon used, but nobody knows who used it. And we saw back in May that the UN went in to investigate a gas attack then, and it was found out that it was most likely the rebels. And
that's right. Carla Di Ponte actually was
yeah.
captured on some radio show saying that they found it was the rebels.
Yeah, and of course, as soon as that evidence started to come through, they pulled them out very quickly.
They pulled the story out, and then they came back. I was surprised that even 3 months later they come back. It seems to me one of the features of the world we live in is that they just flagrantly come up with these positions which, you know, most likely lies, when so many people are informed through the internet. I suppose they just don't care.
Well, it does seem to be an arrogance, doesn't it? They're arrogant that they don't even have to lie anymore. I mean, the position of Obama now is they've sent the UN in to investigate whether or not a chemical attack has happened, but it's not within the UN's remit to see who used those chemical weapons. So what they're saying is, if the UN comes back and says chemical weapons have been used, they're going to go in and bomb Assad, even though there's no evidence. There's no evidence at all, and there's a lot of circumstantial evidence say it wasn't Assad, it was the rebels again. But that's not even part of the UN remit, is to find out who used them.
But with people like Stratfor and established chemical weapons experts, they will say this is the sort of chemical weapon that the rebels would have had, or this is the sort of chemical weapon that Damascus would have had. And so it's going to be interesting to see to what extent the corporate media is going to go on covering up. I mean, it's one thing to cover up independent reporters, but for AP to sort of suppress the story from their own reporter, or for the Washington Post to suppress information from Stratfor, which is practically the Pentagon, is just mind-boggling. And it makes you wonder if, there is some sort of conspiracy by the media bosses, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So what are the other sort of strategic issues here?
There's no support anywhere really for America. American public don't support it. Even the French now, 74% of the French don't want to go in. So America, really this is Obama on his own really. He's got no support from anybody.
Obama and Israel. It seems, and the rebels. Obama, Al-Qaeda and Israel. It seems a strange alliance, doesn't it?
And there was a report that came out that the BND, the German intelligence agency, have reported that 95% of the rebels in Syria are foreign fighters. They're not Syrians.
Right.
So,
well, getting to Europe, of course, this is another interesting thing, isn't it? Because it strikes me that France has utterly made fools of themselves over the last 10 years. For 50 years, they had a very consistent strategic position in France, and that was, we're the alternative to America. If you don't like Russia, we're the sort of acceptable alternative to America. We're not in NATO. They'd pulled out of NATO, or at least out of the operational side of NATO. Famously they opposed the Iraq war, and you had Chirac and Schroeder of Germany and Putin all in a row on TV in 2003 saying, we condemn this aggression against Iraq. And then Sarkozy came in. They had some Muslim riots, which some people said were put up to help Sarkozy win the election. And he basically put the Israel as sort of, he was an Israel firster. And he apologized for not joining the 2003 war, and he instigated the war against Libya, and he and then him and Hollande have been 100% behind these actions in Syria. So it seems to me that French intellectuals must be thinking that, you know, the Israel firsters have sort of really destroyed French strategy. They've destroyed France in a sense, because their economy has always been weak. It was always the political positions they had, that was their claim to leadership of the EU, and they've just made fools of themselves.
But isn't it ironic that it's the French with the Americans this time round rather than the British? And I'm very glad. I was expecting, after the British Parliament voted no, I was expecting to wake up with the English being called the tea-swilling surrender monkeys or something.
Yeah. Yes, because they stopped calling French fries, didn't they? They called them freedom fries.
That's right, they did.
So what would they call English tea? Well, there you go.
Tea-swilling surrender monkeys.
Let us know what they should be calling the British now in Washington.
But I'd like to make the point that I think this is an exceptionally important moment, really, for you know, anybody who's anti-war, anybody who doesn't like the big capitalist system, the corporate control. This is a very important moment, really. America's going it alone this time. And really the whole world's against them. You know, they really are alone, and the whole world's against them. And I think this is a time, if you have any inclination towards anti-war and peace, this is the time to get up and get down to...
Now's the time to show the public and everybody else what you think.
Yeah, get down to the American embassy. There's now people camping outside the American embassy, so there's an ongoing peace protest outside the American embassy, and I'm sure Stop the War will call a big march there just before the congressional vote.
There's even talk, you know, okay, you know, this is pretty wild stuff, but they're talking about, you know, arresting the president for impeachable offences and being so flagrantly in breach of the US Constitution. The BBC said, utterly falsely, in one of their reports, that Obama does not need permission from Congress to start a war, which is just 100% in, you know, completely astonishing ignorance on the part of that BBC report.
Sure.
BBC also said, incidentally, they said the opposition in France is mainly on the right wing. Well, there must be an awful lot of people on the right wing in France of the BBC script. How can Gavin Hewitt of the BBC make such an utterly false statement and still keep his job? You know, there has to be collusion from above, doesn't there?
There does.
For that sort of grossly biased reporting.
But Ban Ki-moon, head of the UN, has said that it will be illegal, even with congressional support.
Of course.
It will be under international
Breach
law.
of the UN
Charter.
Charter.
Article 51,
And the most serious crime,
Yeah.
according to what the Americans themselves said after the fall of the Nazis, the most serious crime is to start a war.
But
They
if
started it once with the rebels,
Yeah.
although you can't find Obama's fingerprints on the rebels, on the Al-Qaeda rebels, but now his fingerprints are all over it. I don't know what the Nobel Peace Prize people are going to have to say about this. Have you seen any comments?
No, I've not, but they should be very shamefaced.
They should be very ashamed of themselves, shouldn't they?
But we are winning the info war, as I say. There's Zbigniew Brzezinski, who said a decade ago that the whole world is becoming politically aware. There's a mass political awakening, has said that the reason they can't get the Syria thing through is because of the alternative media. So we are winning that info war. And if we can stop them now, if we can stop them in Syria, then we won't have to be out stopping them again a year's time from invading Iran. So this is the time to get everything, put all your effort into this, I would say.
Yeah. Well, thanks very much, Roy.
Thank you.